It wasn't like anyone in that room was about to question who Joel Mercer was. That was the problem. In a room like this, people tend to make assumptions. They size you up based on what you're wearing, your posture, and the company you keep. It's a silent judgment, one that's made quickly and rarely reconsidered. No one asks questions or seeks clarification. They just decide. And once they've made their minds, that's it. The verdict is in, and it's final. It never occurred to any of them, and certainly not to Carol, that the Grand Harlow Hotel had actually been taken over 16 months prior by a private investment company known as Meridian Holdings. And if any of them had thought to look up who sat at the top of Meridian Holdings, they wouldn't have needed to ask. Carol Mercer was working the room the way she always did, like it was a performance she'd rehearsed. She had a certain charm about her, a polished air that came from years of perfecting her image. 4 years at the Harrington Group had been spent carefully crafting this version of herself, the one that fit seamlessly into high-level meetings and earned her a spot at exclusive tables. It was the version that got invited back time and time again, and ultimately, the one that got promoted. And then she saw Joel walk in. Her smile didn't fall, it just recalibrated. She glided across the room, her heels clicking out a steady rhythm on the marble floor, the sound echoing through the space in perfect time. "What are you wearing?" she said through her teeth, adjusting his collar with fingers that weren't gentle. Around them, 2 colleagues were close enough to hear every word. Carol knew that. That was the point. "Joel," she said, letting out a sigh. "This is the Harrington Group's big night, their annual gala. We've got important people here, board members and investors. And then I look at you." She waved at his shirt like it was proof of something. "I needed you to look the part, to look like someone who belongs here."
Joel gazed at her, his expression calm and serene, like someone who had already come to terms with what was in front of him, his patience palpable in the silence that hung between them. He apologized and said he would stay out of the way. And he meant it, which somehow made it worse. Carol let out a laugh, loud enough to catch the attention of her colleagues sitting behind her. She leaned in, a sly smile spreading across her face as she raised her glass in a subtle gesture, as if sharing a secret. "He's not exactly the type you'd expect to find in a place like this," she said, her voice low and conspiratorial. "I have a soft spot for him, but let's be real. Some guys just don't have the presence to pull off a room like this." One colleague had a big smile on his face, while the other one was a bit more reserved. His smile was smaller and more cautious. Joel wandered over to the other side of the room. By the entrance of the corridor, a young guy wearing a junior employee badge was standing all by himself, looking really anxious. You could see his lips moving slightly as he practiced what he was going to say, probably a presentation he had to give. His hands were shaking a bit as he held on to a folded piece of paper, likely his notes or the program for the event. Joel slowed his pace as he walked by, his eyes drifting down to the program in his hand. He muttered to himself, his voice low and casual, as if he was talking about something as ordinary as the weather. "Move the Keller numbers to the front of your deck. Lead with the acquisition figure, not the projection. They'll want to see proof before they'll listen to vision." The young man stared at him. He trailed off, his eyes widening in surprise. He said, "We haven't made that public yet. It's not even listed on the official agenda for tonight. How did you—" He paused, clearly taken aback by the question, and seemed to be searching for the right words to say next. Joel was already heading off,
His water glass lifted slightly in a subtle nod, his eyes fixed on what was ahead, his pace calm and unrushed. Joel made his way to the window at the far end of the grand ballroom, where he was met with a breathtaking view of the city below. The urban landscape stretched out before him, a vast and mysterious entity that seemed to be alive, its darkness punctuated by a million twinkling lights that gave it an otherworldly glow, as if it were a living, breathing creature. He stood there, still, content. That's when he showed up, the man in the charcoal suit. Carol was laughing and chatting with the VP of marketing, about 30 feet away, and didn't even notice when he walked away from their little group. She missed the exact moment when he finally caught up with Joel. She didn't notice Joel turn away from the window and hold out his hand, not like someone who was unsure of himself, but more like a person who was greeting a friend he had planned to meet. She did not hear what was said. But then she sensed it, a subtle change in the air that made her pause, her laugh and words trailing off as she turned to look out the window. And what she saw stopped her cold. This was the man who held a position of great power, Richard Hale, the chairman of the board at the Harrington Group, someone Carol had been trying to make a good impression on for 2 whole years to be exact, with careful and strategic efforts driven by a sense of desperation. Richard Hale, standing at the window with her husband, nodding. Joel, her husband, who had just been embarrassed in front of his colleagues and told to stay out of the way, reached into his pocket and pulled out a pen. Then he signed something on the back of a document that Richard Hale was holding, seemingly unfazed by the earlier incident, like it was nothing, like he'd done it 1,000 times. He didn't smirk. He didn't raise an eyebrow. He just looked at her and smiled. Gentle, patient, quiet, like a man who had all the time in the world. You know that feeling when you've misjudged someone and suddenly it hits you, you were completely wrong? That's what's about to happen to Carol. Just bear with me for a second. The thing Joel Mercer just signed at the window is going to turn everything Carol thought she knew upside down. Carol rushed to his side in no more than 40 seconds. She managed to keep a smile on her face until they were close enough for only Joel to hear what she had to say, the space between them shrinking to a point where her words would be private. How do you know Richard Hale? Joel sipped his water. We've crossed paths. She said it again, like she was trying to figure out what it really meant. Crossed paths. It sounded weird to her, like it wasn't something you'd normally say. Joel, come on. This guy doesn't even have dinner with our CEO, and you're telling me he just ran into someone at a party and signed some kind of deal? What's going on? What did you talk to him about? Nothing that concerns the evening. Wrong answer. Listen, I'm asking you to stay out of conversations with certain people like Richard Hale, she said, her voice low and even, but with a hint of tension. Do you have any idea what I've been working towards for the past 4 years and how easily it could all be undone? Joel looked at her, patient, measured, like a man choosing very deliberately what not to say. I'll stay out of your way, he said. Same words as before, same tone. Like it was a line he could repeat 100 times and never mean it as a wound, even when it landed like one. Carol turned and walked back to her circle. That's your husband?
Lena Park, Harrington's business development head, was a force to be reckoned with. Her sharp mind and quick wit made her a formidable opponent, like a precision-crafted letter opener, cutting through complexity with ease and precision, but also twice as deadly in her dealings. Carol let out a laugh, the kind that sounded genuine and carefree. "Don't be taken in by him," she said with a smile. "He's all show, no substance, just decorative." Polite laughter rippled through the group. "Lena called it decorative," she said, her gaze drifting back to Joel as he moved across the room. "But I'm not buying it. Richard Hale doesn't waste 11 minutes on just anyone. He must have had a reason to talk to him, and I want to know what that reason is." Carol's laugh didn't stop. It just hollowed out. She didn't have a response to that, so she switched topics. On the other side of the room, something was happening that was hidden from Carol's view. One of them leaned in close and whispered something to Joel. He listened intently, his eyes fixed on the person speaking, and then with a subtle movement, he tilted his chin slightly to the right, gesturing towards the east wing of the building, his expression serious and thoughtful. The staff member nodded and walked away at a pace that left no doubt it was an order, not a suggestion. An instruction, and then he was gone too. Joel just turned back to the window, like everything was normal again.
The young employee who had been so nervous earlier, the one with the folded program clutched in his hand, managed to track down Carol, who was standing near the bar, probably grabbing a drink or chatting with someone. He spoke in a slow and measured tone, as if he was being extremely cautious with his words, like a person taking tentative steps on a frozen lake, unsure if the ice would support their weight. "Is your husband somehow linked to Meridian Holdings, Mrs. Mercer?" Carol blinked. "What?" "Meridian Holdings," he started to say, but then he caught himself. "Wait, no, I think I got it wrong." He paused, taking a moment to regroup. "I apologize, I must have misheard something." He was already backing away. "Wait," Carol started. Gone. It was the start of something that made her unsure if she really wanted to know the truth. She looked toward the window. Joel was still there, still calm, still waiting. He stood there with a sense of certainty, as if he had already seen the night unfold before him, every moment leading up to its inevitable conclusion. Stay with me, because in the next part, Carol is about to say something in front of this entire room that she can never take back. And Joel? He's going to let her. It was sometime after her second glass of champagne, but before she had finished her third, that Carol came to a decision. She was done managing this quietly. She came across Joel by the east corridor, and everything about him seemed unchanged. The quiet calmness, the same blank expression, and even the glass of water in his hand. Without hesitation, she spoke her mind, the words tumbling out before she could reconsider them. "I need you to leave." Joel looked at her. "It's just for tonight," she said, trying to make it sound better. "You can take the car, and I'll call you when things are slowing down." "You want me to leave the event." "Stop confusing everyone," she said, her voice firm but quiet. "Richard Hale will get the wrong idea and think we're a team, which is not what I want to project tonight." Joel was quiet for a long moment. "I'll stay out of the way, Carol." "You keep saying that." "I keep meaning it." He didn't move. It was a feeling that unsettled her, and for some reason it scared her even more than a loud argument would have, maybe because it was quieter and the silence was more unsettling. She finally tracked down Richard Hale about 20 minutes later, and he was standing near the bar. She walked up to him with a calm and collected air, just like she had practiced in her mind many times before over the course of almost 2 years, perfecting every detail of this moment. "Mr. Hale,
I'm Carol Mercer, in business development. I wanted to reach out and apologize if my husband disrupted your evening in any way. Sometimes he has a hard time sensing the atmosphere and knowing when to hold back. You know, picking up on the vibes in the room. Hale looked at her, but with a focus that was unexpectedly and somewhat unsettlingly precise. "Joel," he said.
Carol smiled and said, "Yes, that's right. He's a good guy, but sometimes he latches on to the most important person in the room without really knowing what he's getting himself into." She laughed softly. Hale didn't. He looked at her the way a man looks at someone who has just said something they will deeply regret. Measured, quiet, almost careful. "Joel, he and I were wrapping up a talk that began in Geneva," Joel said to me. The smile on Carol's face didn't fall. It just stopped making sense. "Geneva," she repeated. Hale put his glass down, a small smile on his face. "He's always been that way, more patient than people give him credit for," he said, his voice low and thoughtful. "I guess you could say he's just a pretty understanding guy, even when we don't exactly deserve it." He excused himself before Carol could respond. Geneva. Joel hadn't been to Geneva, had he? As she thought back over the past 8 months, a lot of things started to add up. All the trips he took without really explaining where he was going, the phone calls he'd take in the other room and then just brush off when she asked who it was, and those Sunday mornings when he'd leave early without giving her any details. She had never really questioned any of it, just letting it all slide. But now it was all starting to seem pretty suspicious. She'd never pushed. She'd never thought to. That one look spoke volumes, revealing all the things Lena's professionalism wouldn't allow her to express openly.
"Excuse me, can I just get everyone to listen for a second?" The gala stilled. Carol's head turned quickly to where the noise was coming from, and then she automatically looked towards the window. Joel was gone. She scanned the room, the corridor, the bar, the cluster near the stage entrance, and then she found him. He was standing just to the left of the stage, hands in his pockets, completely unhurried, positioned exactly where someone stands when they already know what's about to be announced. He didn't smile this time. He just looked at her, patient, still, waiting for her to understand what she was looking at. The person standing at the microphone seemed really calm, like they had given this talk many times before. They didn't appear nervous at all, which made you think they must have rehearsed what they were going to say over and over again. You're probably aware that the Harrington Group has been going through a lot of changes over the past year and a half. Polite attention, standard posture, a room expecting something routine. We're excited to finally make official something that's been kept quiet until now. The atmosphere in the room changed just a little. It's as if the space itself could feel something genuine was coming, and it was getting ready. Effective this quarter, the Harrington Group will operate under the full ownership of Meridian Holdings. A ripple moved through the crowd, real murmuring, champagne glasses lowering, heads turning. Carol had a sense of the word land. It was like she felt it before she even knew what it meant. Meridian Holdings. Is your husband linked to Meridian Holdings in some way? She didn't move. The boss just kept on talking, using all the usual phrases like new opportunities and a fresh start, but Carol had tuned out. She wasn't really listening to what he was saying anymore. The man's smile was a knowing glance, as if he was watching a room finally come to a realization that he had been aware of for a long time. The person in charge of Meridian Holdings has kept a low profile, but that's about to change. The executive paused, deliberately. That changes tonight. Carol's head snapped toward Joel. He hadn't moved, hands in his pockets, expression composed, still exactly where someone stands when they already know what's about to be said about them. Carol watched it lower. And then it hit me, a thought that just appeared out of nowhere, and once it was there, I couldn't shake it off, no matter how hard I tried. What if she'd had it completely backwards this entire time? What if Joel hadn't been attaching himself to the most important person in the room? What if the most important person in the room had simply been waiting, patiently, quietly, without a single word for everyone else to figure out who he was? She crossed the room toward him. She wasn't worried about appearances, didn't think about how things would look to others. Her movements were guided by a sense of urgency, a need to find stability in a world that had suddenly been turned upside down. She acted on instinct, quickly and directly, without stopping to consider the consequences, her actions a little unsteady as she struggled to find her footing. Joel saw her coming. He slowly turned around, his face still carrying that same calm and collected expression he had worn throughout the evening, an expression she had wrongly assumed was a sign of indifference for 4 long years. She stopped in front of him. "Joel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "can you tell me, what exactly is Meridian Holdings?" He looked at her, just looked. "Joel," she said, taking a step closer to him. The screen behind them was still slowly descending, its gentle hum filling the room, but nobody was paying attention to it, too caught up in their own thoughts. Nobody, that is, except Richard Hale, who had turned his back on the stage and was now watching them with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "Joel, I need to know," she said, her voice low and urgent. "What is Meridian Holdings?" She waited for his response, her eyes locked on his, the room around them fading into the background. Joel held her gaze for a long moment. He spoke then, his voice low and gentle, without a hint of harshness, saying, "You should watch the screen, Carol." She turned. The screen had finished descending, and what was on it made her champagne glass go cold in her hand. What's about to happen on that screen is going to change everything Carol has been trying to achieve for the past 4 years. All the conversations, the times she was dismissed, and the laughs at someone's expense are all going to be rewritten right in front of everyone she's been trying to impress. The final part of this story is about to unfold, and it's going to be big. Meanwhile, Joel Mercer has been surprisingly calm, not raising his voice even once, which is quite unusual. The stage is set for something dramatic to happen, and it's going to be interesting to see how things play out from here. On that screen was a photograph. This isn't a formal, staged photo, but rather a spontaneous snapshot of a guy in dark trousers and a basic dress shirt, captured in a spot with great natural lighting as he stands by a window gazing out at the cityscape below him. Joel Mercer, principal and founder of Meridian Holdings. It was tucked away at the bottom of the page, a lone sentence from the latest issue of the Financial Review that seemed out of place, a number that jarred against the phrase "off the rack" in a way that was hard to ignore. The room read it in silence. It's that moment of complete stillness when a huge crowd of people all at the same time suddenly realize they've been viewing something from the entirely wrong perspective. Carol read it 3 times. Her gaze shifted from the picture to the name, then to the title and back again, her eyes locking onto the familiar face, the same one she had adjusted a collar for just 2 hours prior, the same man she had firmly instructed to keep out of the way. She couldn't feel her hands. To her left, she noticed Lena Park wasn't paying attention to the screen. Lena was looking at her.
The boss stretched out his hand to the side of the platform. "Ladies and gentlemen, Joel Mercer." Joel walked forward. He walked up to the microphone with a calm and confident air, like someone who had always belonged in the space, never needing to ask for permission to be there. his entire demeanor that evening having been one of quiet self-assurance, moving through the room with a sense of ease and comfort as if he were completely at home. He shook the executive's hand, adjusted the microphone slightly, looked out at the crowd. He spoke up, getting straight to the point. "To be honest, I've never been very good at giving speeches," he admitted. Quiet laughter, warm, genuine. The Harrington Group built something worth believing in. That's why Meridian acquired it. That's why I'm here tonight. A pause, measured, deliberate. That's why I've always been here. He let that land. Thank you for having me. Applause, real applause, the kind that fills a room completely. As he scanned the room, Joel's gaze drifted lazily over the sea of faces, his eyes locking on to one person in particular. And there, standing perfectly still, was Carol, her champagne glass hovering, forgotten in her hand, her attention seemingly frozen in place. He looked at her and smiled. He gave her the same warm smile, a gentle and patient one, just like he had all evening, a smile that didn't seem to hide any secrets or threats. No triumph, no edge, nothing that looked like satisfaction. He was the kind of person who had always been aware, yet he consistently decided to step back and let her find her own way every single time, without interfering or guiding her.
Carol didn't leave early. She was surrounded by all those people, and suddenly every single thing she had said came flooding back, each word hitting her like a ton of bricks, one after another, in a way that felt really precise, like they were all lining up to haunt her. And it was weird because just a couple of hours before, they hadn't felt so heavy, but now they did. And it was like she could hear them all over again, echoing in her mind. Things like Decorative, Off the Rack, and Doesn't Understand Which League He's In, all of it, and it was overwhelming. Richard Hale walked by her in the hallway, not stopping to talk, but he did glance over at her for a quick moment. The look on his face wasn't one of disgust or disdain. It was something different, though it was hard to read. It was worse than contempt. It was understanding. It was clear to him what kind of evening she was having from the instant she started talking. As the car pulled up, Carol caught one last glimpse of Joel, who was still standing inside, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the chaos that was about to ensue, and he was laughing at some joke Hale had just made. Completely at home, in the room he owned, in the life she had never thought to ask about. Certain individuals have a way of commanding attention the moment they step into a room, as if their very presence demands to be acknowledged. Others simply wait to be understood. Joel Mercer never needed the room's approval. He already had the deed.